Respiratory diseases. Post-operative respiratory complications such as pneumonia are a major cause of morbidity and mortality, especially after major abdominal and thoracic surgery. A patient's current respiratory status should be compared with their normal state. Make a note of the severity of the asthma and COPD, such as past hospital admissions for treatment of the condition, records of pulmonary function tests, use of oral steroids, home oxygen, non-invasive ventilation support, and evidence of right heart failure. A preoperative chest radiograph or scan is useful in patient with known emphysematous bullae, pulmonary cancer, metastasis or effusions, patients on oral steroid treatment, oxygen therapy, or who have a forced expiratory volume in the first second less than 30% of predicted value for age, weight, and height, or PaCO2 level of greater than 6 kilopascal, have severe disease and are at risk of pneumonia and respiratory failure in the post-operative period. Patients should continue to use their regular inhalers until the start of anesthesia. Brittle asthmatics may also need extra steroid cover. Encourage the patients to be compliant with the medications, take a balanced diet, and stop smoking. Information should be provided to indicate perioperative risks associated with smoking. Stopping smoking reduces carbon monoxide levels and offers the patient a better ability to clear sputum. Evidence suggests that preoperative inspiratory muscle training significantly improves respiratory muscle function in the early postoperative period, reducing the risk of pulmonary complications. Regional anesthetic techniques and less invasive surgical options should be considered in severe cases. Elective surgery should be postponed until acute exacerbations are treated. The patient should be referred to a respiratory physician if there is a severe disease or significant deterioration. Major surgery is planned in a patient with significant respiratory comorbidities. Right heart failure is present, dyspnea, fatigue, tricuspid regurgitation, hepatomegaly, and edematous feet. The patient is young and has severe respiratory problems, indicates a rare condition. Gastrointestinal disease, nil by mouth and regular medications. Patients are advised not to take solids within 6 hours and clear fluids, isotonic drinks, and waters within 2 hours before anesthesia to avoid the risk of acid aspiration syndrome. These restrictions are further reduced in infants by keeping hydrated reduces discomfort and is known to improve post-operative outcomes. If the surgery is delayed, oral intake of clear fluids should be allowed until 2 hours before surgery, or intravenous fluids should be started, especially in vulnerable groups of patients, example children, the elderly, and diabetics. Patients can continue to take their specified routine medications with sips of water in the NBM period. Regurgitation risk. Patients with hiatus hernia, obesity, pregnancy, and diabetes are at high risk of pulmonary aspiration even if they have been nil by mouth before elective surgery. Clear antacids, H2 receptor blockers, example ranitidine, or proton pump inhibitors, example omeprazole, may be given at an appropriate time in the pre-operative period. Liver disease. In patients with liver disease, the cause of the disease needs to be known, as well as any evidence of clotting problems, renal involvement, and encephalopathy. Elective surgery should be postponed until any acute episode has settled, example cholangitis. The blood tests that need to be performed include liver function tests, coagulation, blood glucose, and urea, UNE, the presence of ascites, esophageal varices, hypoalbuminemia, and sodium and water retention should be noted, as all can influence the choice and outcome of anesthesia and surgery. Genitourinary disease, renal disease, underlying conditions leading to chronic renal failure such as diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and ischemic heart disease should be stabilized before elective surgery. Appropriate measures should be taken to treat acidosis. Hypocalcemia and hypokalemia are of greater than 6 millimole per liter. Arrangements should be made to continue peritoneal or hemodialysis until a few hours before surgery. After the final dialysis before surgery, a blood sample should be sent for FBC and UNEs. Chronic renal failure patients often suffer chronic microcytic anemia that is well tolerated. Therefore, preoperative blood transfusion is often not necessary. Acute kidney injury can present with an acute surgical problem. For example, bowel obstruction needing emergency surgery. In these patients, medical treatment should be started at the earliest opportunity and carried on through surgery and through into the critical care unit. Urinary tract infection. Uncomplicated urinary tract infections are common in women, while outflow uropathy with chronically infected urine is common in men. These infections should be treated before embarking on elective surgery, where infection carries dire consequences, example joint replacement. For emergency procedures, antibiotics should be started and care taken to ensure that the patient maintains a good urine output before, during, and after surgery. Endocrine and metabolic disorders, malnutrition, body mass index in weights in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. A BMI of less than 18.5 indicates nutritional impairment, and a BMI below 15 is associated with significant hospital mortality. Nutritional support for a minimum of 2 weeks before surgery is required to have an impact on subsequent morbidity. If a patient is unlikely to be able to eat for a significant period, arrangements should be made by the pre-operative assessment team to start nutritional support in the immediate post-operative phase. Obesity. Morbid obesity can be defined as BMI of more than 35. Other definitions exist and is associated with increased risk of post-operative complications. Patients should be made aware of risks involved and advised on healthy eating and taking regular exercise. Associated sleep apnea can be predicted by using a clinical scoring system, the perioperative sleep apnea prediction PSAP score, or sleep apnea studies. There is evidence to suggest that patient outcomes improve with more than 6 weeks of use of a continuous positive airway pressure CPAP device preoperatively and cholesterol reducing agents in the perioperative phase. If possible, surgery should be delayed until the patient is more active and has lost weight. If this fails, prophylactic measures need to be taken, such as preventive measures for acid aspiration and deep vein thrombosis, and associated risks need to be explained prior to the surgery. Diabetes mellitus. Diabetes and associated cardiovascular and renal complications should be controlled to as near normal level as possible before embarking on elective surgery. Any history of hyper and hypoglycemic episodes and hospital admissions should be noted. HbA1c levels should be checked. For elective surgery, HbA1c of less than 69 millimole per mole is recommended. Lipid lowering medication should be started in patients who are in a high risk group for cardiovascular complications of diabetes. Patients with diabetes should be first on the operating list, and if the operation is in the morning, advised to omit the morning dose of medication and breakfast. Though tight control of blood sugar is not needed, the patient's blood sugar levels should be checked too early. For those on the afternoon list, breakfast can be given with half their regular dose of intermediate acting insulin or full dose oral anti-diabetic agents, and then managed with regular blood sugar checks as above. An intravenous insulin sliding scale should be started for insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, patients undergoing major surgery, or if blood sugar is difficult to control for other reasons. Adrenocortical suppression. Patients receiving oral adrenocortical steroids should be asked about the dose and duration of the medication in view of supplementation with extra doses of steroids perioperatively to avoid an Addisonian crisis. Coagulation disorders. Thrombophilia. Patients with a strong family history or previous personal history of thrombosis should be identified. They will need thromboprophylaxis in the perioperative period. The progesterone-only contraceptive pill should be continued. However, the risk of continuing the combined pill, slight increase of significant thrombosis, should be weighed against the risks of an unplanned pregnancy. Consider stopping estrogen-containing oral contraceptives or hormone replacement therapy 4 weeks before surgery. NICE guidelines. The reader is advised to use an appropriate source for precise formulation, information, and current guidance. Patients with a low risk of thromboembolism can be given thromboembolism deterrent stockings to wear during the perioperative period. High-risk patients with a history of recurrent DVT, pulmonary embolism, and arterial thrombosis will be given warfarin. This should be stopped before surgery and replaced by low molecular weight heparin or factor 10A inhibitors. Local and national guidelines advise what type of DVT prophylaxis should be used for each type of surgery. Neurological and psychiatric disorders. In patients with a history of stroke, pre-existing neurological deficit should be recorded. The patients may be on antiplatelet agents or anticoagulants. If it is felt that the neurological and cardiovascular thrombotic risks are low, antiplatelet agents should be withdrawn. 7 days for aspirin, 10 days for clopidogrel. If the thrombotic risks are perceived to be high and the patient is undergoing surgery with a high risk of bleeding, aspirin alone should be continued. Anticonvulsants and anti-Parkinson medication is continued perioperatively to help early mobilization of the patient. Lithium should be stopped 24 hours prior to surgery. Blood levels should be measured to exclude toxicity. The anesthetist should be informed if patients are on psychiatric medications such as tricyclic antidepressants or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, as these may interact with anesthetic drugs. Risk factors for thrombosis: age more than 60 years, obesity, BMI more than 30 kg per meter square, trauma or surgery, anesthesia more than 90 minutes, reduced mobility for more than 3 days, pregnancy or puerperium, varicose veins with phlebitis. Drugs example estrogen contraceptive, HRT, smoking, known active cancer or on treatment, significant medical comorbidities, critical care admission, family or personal history of thrombosis, example deficiencies of antithrombin 3, protein S and C. Musculoskeletal disorders, rheumatoid arthritis can lead to an unstable cervical spine with the possibility of spinal cord injury during intubation. Therefore, flexion and extension lateral cervical spine radiographs should be obtained in symptomatic patients. Assessment of the severity of renal, cardiac, valvular, and pericardial involvement as well as restrictive lung disease should be carried out. Rheumatologists will advise on steroids and disease modifying drugs so as to balance immunosuppression, chance of infections against the need to stabilize the disease perioperatively. Stopping disease modifying drugs can lead to flare up of the disease. In ankylosing spondylitis patients, in addition to the problems discussed above, techniques of spinal and or epidural anesthesia are often challenging. Patients with systemic lupus erythematosus may exhibit a hypocoagulable state along with airway difficulties. With certain types of orthopedic operations such as joint replacement, antibiotic prophylaxis will be required and will usually follow specific local or national guidelines. Airway assessment, the ability to intubate the trachea and oxygenate the patient are basic and crucial skills of the anesthetist. The ease or difficulty encountered while performing airway maneuvers can be predicted by simple examination findings of full mouth opening, modified Mallampati class, jaw protrusion, neck movement and thyromental distance. The anesthetist should look for loose teeth, obvious tumors, scars, infections, obesity, thickness of the neck, etc., which will indicate difficulty in visualizing the airway. When more than one of the above tests are possible, the chances of experiencing difficulty in obtaining and securing the airway becomes greater. To obtain the modified Mallampati class, the anesthetist sits in front of the patient who is asked to open their mouth and protrude the tongue. The higher the grade, the higher the risk in obtaining and securing airway. Figure 17.4, extension view of cervical spine in patient with rheumatoid arthritis. 17.5, flexion view in the same patient as in 17.4. Note the large increase in atlantodense interval, implying significant instability at this level. Preoperative assessment in emergency surgery. In urgent or emergency surgery, the principles of preoperative assessment should be the same as in elective surgery, except that the opportunity to optimize the condition is limited by time constraints. Medical assessment and treatment should be started as per advanced trauma life support guidelines, even if there is no time to complete them before the start of the surgical procedure. Some risks may be reduced, but some may persist, and whenever possible, these need to be explained to the patient. 17.6, normal mouth opening, jaw. Airway assessment, Samsoon and Young modified Mallampati test. Forceps, pillars, soft palate and uvula seen, it's grade 1. Forceps, soft pillar with some part of uvula seen, it's grade 2. Soft palate seen, grade 3. Hard palate only seen is grade 4. So the intubation difficulty level goes on increasing with increase in grade. Preoperative assessment for emergency surgery starts similar principles to that of elective surgery. Constraints, time, facilities available, consent may not be possible in life-saving emergencies. Organizational effort, for example, local or national algorithms for treatment of the patient with multiple injuries. Assessment of high-risk patient. Despite higher risk patients presenting for surgery, the perioperative mortality has decreased significantly over the last half of a century, especially in resource-rich countries. In a published systematic review in the Lancet, perioperative mortality has declined from 10,600 per million in the 1970s to 1,176 per million in the 1990s to 2000s. However, there remains a subgroup of patients who are at higher risk of morbidity and mortality after surgery. By identifying high-risk patients in the pre-operative phase and planning their perioperative management, morbidity and mortality can be reduced. Patients who have a predicted mortality of more than 5% should be considered as high risk. It is estimated that although the high risk group accounts for less than 15% of all surgical procedures, they contribute to more than 80% of all perioperative deaths in UK. What causes these patients to be at a high risk of death and complications after surgery? After surgery, tissue destruction, blood loss, fluid shifts, change in temperature and pain and anxiety result in increased demands of oxygen delivery to the tissues. This demand increases from an average to 110 ml per minute per meter square at rest to 170 ml per minute per meter square in the post-operative period. Most patients meet these increase in demand by increasing their cardiac output and tissue oxygen extraction. Patients who are unable to meet these demands as a result of a limited cardiorespiratory reserve are at a risk of oxygen death. Occult hypovolemia resulting from fluid shift or blood loss can further impair oxygen delivery. Splanchnic vasoconstriction to compensate for this may result in gut ischemia. Those with coronary or cerebrovascular disease are also at higher risk of myocardial ischemia or stroke. Factors contributing to risk. Risk is a complex interaction of multiple factors that can be classified into patient and surgical factors. Patient factors are listed in table 17.5. The elderly, though not independently at higher risk, not only suffer from more cardiac, pulmonary and renal disease but also require surgery 4 times as often as the rest of the population. Around 10% of the population over 65 have frailty with increasing incidence with age. Frailty is a distinctive state that is related to aging. Multiple body systems lose their inbuilt reserves in the elderly. The type of surgery contributes independently and is listed in table 17.6. This risk increases if the surgery is performed as an emergency. Often the underlying condition necessitating surgery itself may be associated with an increased risk of complications. For example, a patient with severe peripheral vascular disease resulting from heavy smoking may need a femoral popliteal bypass graft and can be expected also to have significant COPD and ischemic heart disease. Moreover, when mortality by type of surgery is adjusted for patient risk factors, the apparent hierarchy of surgical risk may change. The average mortality risk for an individual patient undergoing thoracic surgery, for example, is likely to be higher than the average risk for the same patient undergoing vascular surgery. Complications associated with the latter are nevertheless more frequent because vascular patients have greater medical risk factors. Table 17.5. Patient factors that predispose to high risk of morbidity and mortality. Previous severe cardiorespiratory illness, example acute myocardial infarction, COPD or stroke. Late stage vascular disease involving aorta. Age more than 70 years with limited physiological reserve in one or more vital organs. Extensive surgery for carcinoma. Acute abdominal catastrophe with hemodynamic instability, example peritonitis. Acute massive blood loss more than 8 units. Septicemia. Positive blood crunch or septic focus. Respiratory failure, PaCO2 less than 8 kilopascal or FiO2 of more than 0.4 or mechanical ventilation for more than 48 hours. Acute renal failure, urea more than 20 millimole or creatinine is more than 260 millimole per liter. 17.6. Surgery specific estimates of risk. High risk is cardiac risk more than 5%, open aortic, major vascular, peripheral vascular, urgent body cavity. Its intermediate risk, cardiac risk 1 to 5%, elective abdominal, carotid, endovascular aneurysm, head and neck, major neurosurgery, arthroplasty, elective pulmonology, major urology. Low risk, cardiac risk less than 1%, breast, dental, thyroid, ophthalmic, gynecological, reconstructive, minor orthopedic, minor urology. Table. The effect of adjustment for patient factors on surgery specific operative mortality. So this diagram, type of surgeries are given. Unadjusted 30-day mortality according to the ranks and adjusted 30-day mortality. In summary, the typical high-risk patient is the elderly patient with coexisting conditions such as ischemic heart disease and or COPD undergoing major surgery. The risk will increase if the surgery is performed as an emergency. Management of risk. The key to managing patients effectively is the identification and accurate quantification of the risk and subsequent measures taken to minimize it. Realistic estimates of risk are the cornerstone of informed patient consent and shared decision making. The patient and the surgeon may choose a less extensive or even a non-surgical option where risks of the definitive procedure are deemed to be too high or unacceptable. The Royal College of Surgeons of England has recommended that the patients who are predicted to have greater than 5% mortality risk should have active consultation and input in all stages of their management. Surgical procedures in those with predicted mortality of more than 10% should be conducted under the direct supervision of consultant surgeon or anesthetist, unless the consultants are satisfied with the seniority and competence of the staff managing these patients. Moreover, those with a mortality of more than 10% should be managed in the critical care facility. Depending on particular comorbidities, it may be possible for a patient's underlying condition to be improved by optimizing their medical therapy. Additional physiological optimization may take the form of measures to minimize myocardial ischemia or measures to improve oxygen delivery to the other major organs depending on the prevailing risks. Optimization before surgery can be more effective in a critical care environment, and patients may need to be admitted to a high dependency unit or intensive therapy unit pre-operatively. The likelihood of the high-risk patient requiring post-operative critical care should be planned pre-operatively and discussed with the duty critical care physician. The identification of patients who will benefit the most from these interventions is important, not only for the improvement of outcomes but also the effective allocation of resources. As discussed above, emergency surgery is associated with higher risks because by its very nature there is less time and opportunity to organize these additional levels of care. Summary 17.7, the practical approach to care for the high risk patient: identify the high risk patient, assess the level of risk, detail pre-operative assessment, adequate resuscitation, optimize medical management, investigation to define the underlying surgical problem, immediate and definitive treatment of underlying problems, consider admission to a critical care facility post-operatively. Identification of the high-risk patient. A number of scoring systems have been developed over the years with the aim to identifying high-risk patients. American Society of Anesthesiologists system. The American Society of Anesthesiologists scoring system is widely used. Although not designed to be used as a risk prediction score, it has a quantitative association with the predicted percentage of post-operative mortality. However, it does not account for age or nature of surgery, and the term systemic disease in ASA grading introduces an element of subjectivity. Metabolic equivalent. As discussed earlier, overall functional physical fitness can be judged by the ability to tolerate metabolic equivalent tasks. One metabolic equivalent task is equivalent to the oxygen consumption of an adult at rest, that's approximately 3.5 milliliter per kg per minute. Different tasks are assigned a number of metabolic equivalent tasks. If the patient is able to perform more than 4 metabolic equivalent tasks, example climbing at least one flight of stairs, they are considered suitable candidates for major surgery. However, once again, this depends on subjective assessment of the ability of a patient and may be overestimated by them. Objective indices based on weighted scores pertaining to surgery and comorbidity have been created to stratify cardiac risk. Example include the Goldman Cardiac Risk Index and the Revised Cardiac Risk Index of Lee. Although they can predict risk of cardiac complications, they are not designed to predict mortality. Possum score, the Possum score, that's physiologic and operative severity score for the enumeration of mortality and morbidity, and its modification P-Possum, CR-Possum are used to predict all-cause mortality in post-operative critical care patients as well as non-cardiac morbidity. Here are some tables. Surgical risk scores classified by outcome measures and need for intraoperative information. These are just the names of scores. You can take a screenshot of these tables and learn them by yourself. Table 17.9, operative mortality by ASA grading. Table 17.10, metabolic equivalent of tasks. Table 17.11, the revised cardiac index of Lee. ACS NSQIP score, the American College of Surgeons National Surgical Quality Improvement Program. Surgical risk score estimates the chance of a complication or death after surgery for more than 1,000 different surgical procedures. It compares the patient's risk with an average person's risk. It is a web-based tool done pre-operatively. The risk is calculated based on surgical procedure and 19 patient-specific pre-operative risk factors. Cardiopulmonary exercise testing. Cardiopulmonary exercise testing can be used as a screening tool to identify high-risk patients. The oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production of the patient are measured while they undergo a 10-minute period of incrementally demanding exercise, usually on a cycle ergometer, up to the maximally tolerated level. Cardiopulmonary exercise testing is based on the principle that when a subject's delivery of O2 to active tissue becomes inadequate, anaerobic metabolism begins. Lactate is buffered by bicarbonate and the resulting CO2 increases out of proportion to the escalation in physical difficulty and O2 consumption. The anaerobic threshold is the O2 consumption in the milliliter per kg per minute, above which this occurs. Peak oxygen consumption (VO2) is also measured. They are the end products of a subject's combined respiratory, cardiac, vascular and musculoskeletal fitness, and subjects with either at an AT above somewhat arbitrary cutoff of 11 and a VO2 below 15 milliliter per kg per minute are at higher risk of morbidity and mortality after surgery. When cardiopulmonary exercise test is not available, a simple walk test such as 6-minute walk test and the incremental shuttle walk test can be used to assess the functional capacity of the patient. They depend on the patient's ability to walk for a fixed 6-minute period or at increasing speed over a flat surface. Here the diagram can see the cardiopulmonary exercise testing being done. Figure 17.7. Optimization of the high-risk patient. As discussed above, all coexisting disease processes should be reviewed and optimized. Simple measures including stopping smoking, maximal benefit only seen if stopped for 8 weeks prior to surgery, reducing alcohol intake, losing weight, improving nutrition and or hemoglobin levels. In the high-risk group, there may a need for more complex investigations, review of medications, or even consideration of further surgery. Patients scheduled for abdominal aortic aneurysm repair surgery, for example, frequently require carotid duplex scans. If the scans reveal a significant blockage and a high risk of preoperative stroke, a carotid end arteriotomy may be indicated prior to AAA repair. All high-risk patients benefit from multidisciplinary team care and the involvement of experienced physicians in the perioperative period. The impact and management of the comorbidities that commonly contribute to risk are outlined below. Ischemic heart disease. Perioperative myocardial infarction is associated with a high mortality, ischemia, and ultimately MI occur when the supply of oxygen to the myocardium is exceeded by its demand. This situation can be precipitated by hypotension, tachycardia, and procoagulant states, of which the inflammatory response to surgery is an example. Preparation of these patients for surgery should aim to optimize myocardial oxygen supply and demand ratio and so minimize the risk of myocardial ischemia developing. This work may involve further investigations or even the decision to postpone non-cardiac surgery for 3 to 6 months after an MI. Some patients may require preoperative revascularization using either a coronary artery bypass graft or percutaneous coronary intervention with a stent or angioplasty. Minimizing myocardial ischemia. Anesthesia techniques that dampen the stress response to surgery, especially minimizing pain and provide a good degree of cardiac stability, should be used. Anesthesia should avoid tachycardia, systolic hypertension, and diastolic hypertension and may be facilitated by the use of invasive arterial blood pressure monitoring. Blood loss must be accurately monitored and hemoglobin maintained at a level suitable for the patient's cardiac risk factors. Perioperative use of beta blockers may be considered, but this is controversial. Troponin testing allows early diagnosis of perioperative MIs, but there are limited reperfusion options due to risk of bleeding from the surgical site. Admissions to SDU should be considered for patients with ischemic heart disease and supplemental oxygen therapy continued for 3 to 4 days. Cardiac failure. Left ventricular failure is the end result of several conditions including ischemic heart disease, hypertension, cardiomyopathies, and valve dysfunction. Decompensated heart failure puts the patient at risk of multi-organ failure. Those with ejection fractions of less than 35% and in whom the failure is undiagnosed or its severity underestimated are at the highest risk. The patient's functional capacity needs to be assessed and surgery may have to be delayed for investigations such as an echocardiogram and or for optimization of medical therapy. Drugs used in chronic heart failure have significant implications for perioperative care, and beta blockers and probably ACE inhibitors, unless renal perfusion is to be significantly affected, should be continued. Anesthesia should be ensured, minimal cardiac depression and change in afterload during surgery. Arrhythmias must be rapidly brought under control, particularly atrial fibrillation, and correcting any electrolyte imbalance is crucial in this respect. Invasive monitoring of trends in central venous and arterial pressure monitoring may help management, particularly when large fluid shifts are expected to occur. Respiratory failure. Around 1.5% of patients develop lower respiratory tract infection after surgery with a 30-day mortality over 20%. Surgery, particularly open abdominal procedures under general anesthesia, result in changes to respiratory physiology. The functional residual capacity of the lungs is reduced. This, combined with the respiratory depressant effect of residual anesthetic agent, the patient's limited mobility and pain from surgery causes atelectasis, failure of gas exchange due to alveolar collapse, and predisposes patients to post-operative respiratory infections. Other complications including bronchospasm, pneumothorax, and acute respiratory distress syndrome contribute to as much to morbidity and length of hospital stay as cardiac complications. Respiratory failure defined as PaO2 less than 8 kPa in air and PaO2 by FiO2 less than 40 kilopascal, or inability to extubate a patient 48 hours after surgery is by far the most significant of these and is associated with a mortality of 27 to 40%. Again, with Again, as with cardiac risk management, it may be necessary to postpone surgery to allow medical optimization or consider a non-operative option. Preoperatively, bronchodilator therapy will be required in those with reversible obstructive airway disease, and steroids may need to be started or increased. Nutritional status should be optimized and albumin levels corrected. Physiotherapy for postural drainage and deep breathing exercises or incentive spirometry should be considered for patients at increased risk of respiratory complications. General anesthesia is associated with more respiratory complications, and so regional techniques should be considered where possible in these patients. Hypoxia and CO2 retention leading to the need for reintubation is better avoided in those at risk by delaying extubation until analgesia, hydration, and acid-base status have been corrected. Patients may benefit from ITU admission, and this needs planning. Application of non-invasive respiratory support may allow certain patients to be extubated earlier. Other comorbidities, acute kidney injury, chronic kidney injury, diabetes, peripheral vascular disease, and liver dysfunction are some of the medical conditions that contribute to risk and need to be optimized. Sepsis. Sepsis needs urgent identification and treatment, as if not treated early, it can lead to either prolonged admission to a critical care unit or death. Early resuscitative measures in sepsis include administering broad spectrum antibiotics and treating hypertension, hypovolemia, and elevated lactate level with appropriate intravenous fluids. It is also important to deal with the source of sepsis as early as possible, minimizing the impact of surgery in the high risk patient. There are situations where the selection of one surgical technique over another may be significantly influenced by patient risk factors. Some procedures are not primarily high risk but may become in unsuitable patients. Laparoscopic surgery, for example, has come of age as a preferred technique for patients predisposed to post-operative respiratory complications, but its effect on cardiac physiology means the same may not apply to patients at risk for cardiac complications. The expanding demand and indications for minimal access surgery are now pushing the boundaries of intraoperative physiological tolerance. Robotic prostatectomy and some laparoscopic colorectal procedures require a pneumoperitoneum with steep tension head down positioning for several hours. This can be associated with adverse cardiovascular and neurological complications such as myocardial ischemia and increased intracranial pressure in the high risk group. This risk may be minimized by attention to patient selection. Role of critical care and outreach services. Before starting, we will see the images. 17.8 non-invasive ventilation is being given, and 17.9 robotic surgery is being done, which is shown. Role of critical care and outreach services. Optimal care in the high risk group should be extended to include post-operative support, which for a majority of these patients mean admission to a critical care bed. Reports from the National Confidential Inquiry into Surgical Deaths show that the majority of post-operative deaths in UK occur more than 5 days after surgery. Admission to critical care unit allows for early intervention and level of care that is difficult to deliver in the ward environment during this crucial period. The high-risk surgical population accounts for 80% of post-operative deaths, but only about 15 to 30% of high-risk surgical patients are admitted to a critical care unit at any time following surgery. One study that compared surgical mortality in the UK and the USA found an observed mortality of 9.95% in the UK as compared to 2.1% in USA. It is suggested that the difference may be related to the provision of critical care services, with 8.6 critical care beds per 1 lakh population in the UK compared to 30.5 in the USA. In the last decade, the role of critical care has been expanded to the concept of critical care without walls. The intensive care outreach services grew from a recognition that there were many patients in the hospital who are at risk of being critically ill, and early identification of these patients using early warning scores could allow for early intervention. The outreach team functions to bridge the gap between critical care unit and ward. Figure 17.10, we can see a high-risk patient admitted to the intensive care unit post-operatively. Consent. Consent should be both voluntary and informed. The process of consent has evolved over the years, and in the UK, following a recent legal judgment, new guidelines has been published. See further reading in RCS. This describes the importance of supported decision making concerning a treatment or operation. The guidance outlines the key principles of consent and how the decision should give the patient the information required to make a decision, be tailored to the individual patient, explain all reasonable treatment options, discuss all material risks. Furthermore, the guide explains that consent should be written and recorded on a form. The key points of the discussion should be recorded in the case notes. Material risk, whether in the circumstance of the particular case a reasonable person in the patient's position would be likely to attach significance to the risk, or the doctor or should reasonably be aware that the particular patient would likely attach significance to it. Clearly, in certain emergency situations, it may not be possible to follow all the key principles. For consent to be given, the patient must have capacity, which includes the ability to understand the information provided, to retain and use the information to make a decision, and to indicate that what that decision. The surgeon should presume the patient has capacity for consent unless during the process it is demonstrated that this is not the case. Generally, children are presumed to have capacity at 16, and for those under that age, capacity can be assessed. The person obtaining consent must be appropriately experienced to do so. Summary 17.8. Consent should be voluntary and informed. Supported decision making is considered good practice. Explain all treatment options and material risks. Capacity is needed for a patient to give their consent. Arranging the theatre list. The date, place and time of operation should be matched with availability of personnel. Appropriate equipment and instruments should be made available. The operating list should be distributed as early as possible to all staff who are involved in making the list run smoothly. If this is done electronically, familiarity with the computer system is required. Prioritize patients, example, children and diabetic patients should be placed at the beginning of the list. Life and limb threatening surgery should take priority. Cancer patients need to be treated early. Table 17.12. Perioperative teams, ward, theatre and specialist nursing staff, anesthetists and surgical teams, radiology, pathology involvement, rehabilitation and social care workers, specific personnel in individual cases.